Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. We're going to hear further from Mr. Crawford today. So I'm going to ask the usher to ask Mr. Crawford to come. Mr. Crawford is not drawing the crowds. No. Good morning, Mr. Crawford.
Morning.
Are you ready to carry on?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Mills.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Crawford, good morning. Yesterday, when we finished, we were tracing through the progress of cavity barriers through the Harley drawings in early 2015. And so the next stop is the drawings of the 3rd of March 2015, which you will find, please, at SEA 000-12850. And this is an email from Kevin Lamb to Simon Lawrence, copied to you and Bruce Soanes and others at Harley of the 3rd of March 2015. Simon, please find attached drawings now showing the fire breaks, both horizontal and vertical. We assume a requirement of 90 minutes integrity and 30 minutes insulation is sufficient. If not, please advise. The vertical breaks are not on all columns, just party walls. If we could next go to SEA 00003160, page 2, we could find your comments on those drawings. And we can see those in your usual red capitals. Those are yours, are they?
Yes.
And you can see the stamp on the right-hand side marked with a B, and a date next to your initials, 6th of March 2015. You see that?
Yes.
And you can see in those drawings that they show the location of the horizontal and vertical cavity barriers on the elevations. Am I right?
Correct.
They do. But we don't see any cavity barriers at all around the windows, do we?
No.
And I don't think you commented there on the absence of cavity barriers there at the time, did you?
Round the windows? No.
No. Was that because you had understood from Mr. Soanes that they weren't required?
That was from, as mentioned previously, the strategy was just dealing with the compartments, and that's correct, not round the windows.
Right, I see. If we can go down to page 12 in the same document set, please. We can see there we can see there a horizontal cavity barrier set above the window within the cladding, can't we?
Yes.
Then that's that, just so that everyone else understands what we're talking about. Could you just point it out for us on the drawing?
How do you want to do that?
That's a very good point. Let me put it to you then. It's the big shaded oblong on the left.
Yes. So that what you're seeing here is the horizontal cavity barrier, which is has an intumescent front, so it's held 25 mil or thereabouts off the front face of the metal panel. So that allows it's pressure equalised facade, so it allows the air to freely move up and down the facade.
Right. And the cavity barrier position has moved from the head of the window on the Studio E drawings to further up. Do you agree that that means that it's now out of line with the compartment floor?
No, it's lined with the compartment floor. The concrete behind is the floor.
But it's not at the head of the window, is it, anymore? It's further up, as you can see.
Well, where it should correctly be is at the extent of the compartment, which is correct where it's drawn there.
But it's in the middle of the concrete slab. It's not at the line of the concrete slab and the compartment ceiling, is it?
Well, you couldn't, because you can see there's a chamfer at the bottom of the concrete slab.
I mean, it doesn't comply with diagram 33 of ADB because it's not in line with the line of the compartment.
But it is in line with... No, that's not correct. It is in line with the compartment line. The compartment line is the floor.
Can you explain why it's different from Studio E's original drawing?
But it's fundamentally isn't.
fundamentally you say it isn't?
Because both well, as I recall, I don't have the drawing in front of me, but the drawing would have shown the cavity barrier within the compartment floor or wall, in this instance floor construction. So it's lining up with the compartment floor.
I see, okay. Now, if you could look at SEA 00003160, page 12, the note next to the drawing, you see that? Yeah, I can see it. On the left-hand side says, and it needs to be expanded, I think, so that we can all read it. Fire break cut around cladding. You see that? Fire break cut around cladding rails, all joints taped on top face. Did you think about, looking at that, whether the proposal to cut the cavity barriers may affect the ability of the cavity barrier to inhibit fire spread within the cladding?
No.
Why is that?
Because the contractor has drawn on his philosophy of bringing it round the rails. I mean, this would be a fairly standard way of introducing the cavity barrier across the rail system behind. I mean, there would be no other way to do it.
Right. Mr. Chairman, I've lost my connection, I'm afraid, with the transcript. I can carry on, but I wonder whether I can have some assistance.
I think help
Thank
is
you.
at hand.
Very good. Well, I'll continue. Mr. Crawford, I apologise. Should it not have occurred to you at the time that Harley needed to explain to you why cutting the cavity barriers was safe or appropriate?
Not at all. It's a specialist item, and Harley are specialist contractors. This is what they do every day. So I'd expect them to know what they're doing and how they're doing it in terms of at that level of technical construction. That's the specialism you're paying for when you employ them.
I see. Did anybody at Harley or indeed Siderise ever raise with you the potential for there being a weak link for fire around the windows? Do you recall that being the subject of discussion? No. But we've now looked at Harley's overall design of where cavity barriers should be located. I'm now going to turn to the question of what fire rating the cavity barriers should have had. Okay?
Yes.
So we're clear about the topic. Now that we've got to March, at this point, March 2015, construction was well underway, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes. And still, there was no final design reached with regard to the cavity barriers.
That's correct.
That's correct. And do you agree with me that that should have been something which had been resolved some 14 months earlier at the tender stage?
Well, it was at the tender stage because the strategy remained the same from tender stage to now.
The strategy for the cavity barriers around the windows, I can see, remained the same, but the strategy for the cavity barriers being in line with the compartment floors had changed through the Harley drawings, as we've seen, yes?
No.
No, you say no.
No.
All right. Now, go to EXO 0001315, please. And I'd like you to look at the second email down on the page. This is the email of the 3rd of March 2015 from Kevin Lamb to you, to Simon Lawrence, copy to you and Mr. Soanes. And we've seen that. And then the one above it from you to Neil, to Terry Ashton, 3rd of March. You see that one?
Yes.
And if we move up to that, you ask the question, hi Terry, just a quick question relating to Grenfell Tower. As part of the reclad, we have added fire breaks? Sorry, let me try that one again. As part of the reclad, we have added fire breaks around the apartments as per the email below. Can you comment on the level of protection, 90 plus 30, as to whether this is suitable? My only query might be that we have different levels of party wall at the lower levels. See attached fire plan with some 60, some 120 walls. Okay? Now, at that stage, my question is, did you understand Harley's drawings to show cavity barriers or fire stops?
I understood them to show cavity barriers. Part of the pretext to Kevin Lamb's email was that we had been having a number of meetings with building control on site. They were quite often at the back of the design team meetings. And the reason that this figure of 90 and 30 came up was from meeting with building control, where building control would requested that we had ratings that matched the compartment ratings.
Right.
The reason Kevin put 90 on instead of 60 was because they couldn't source 60-minute cavity barriers, so he ended up speccing up to 90.
I see. If we could look at your witness statement at paragraph 113, which is at page 41, and that's SEA 000142275. You can see in para 113, in the second line there, you say, you referred the query to Exover, and you say, as they had produced the fire strategy, and so would be best placed to respond to the query. Essentially, I was trying to be proactive in resolving the issue of cavity barriers in a neutral way, you say, which I discuss further from paragraph 229 below. What did you think was your relationship with Exover at this point, which allowed you to use them for advice, as and when you felt you needed it?
I thought they were employed as consultants.
So same as yesterday, was when we looked at the same question yesterday. So nothing had changed.
Yes.
I see. Now, why did you want to resolve the question, as you put it here, in a neutral way?
Because, as I alluded to earlier, we'd had meetings with building control, and clearly building control's interpretation of both cavity barrier and fire stop and the ratings of them were quite different to what originally Harley had proposed in their RFI, and then what I was saying based on what my belief was we should be putting in, i.e. in line with the employer's requirement scheme. And so going to a higher fire authority in a way seemed like a logical way to check. Okay, let's get an authority's view on what the correct level and rating should be.
I see. So would this be right, that you were really acting as a go-between, as between Harley on the one hand and building control on the other, and had gone to Exover to, as it were, break the deadlock?
I wouldn't necessarily use the word go-between, but
what would you say?
Part of the process trying to resolve the problem.
Yeah. As an architect or someone occupying that role, was it not up to you, Mr. Crawford, to understand the issue and to advise your clients and not act as a neutral party?
But I was that, and that's why I took, I suppose, exception to the last phrase you used, is that I was part of that process, but you have to understand you've got a specialist who has more experience than you installing these systems every day, who's saying one thing. You've got building control, who ultimately you have to satisfy. They had the last word in terms of signing the building off and achieving building control compliance. So respectfully, you have to understand what their understanding is. If that contradicts what the specialist's understanding is and what your understanding is, then it's perfectly logical to then go to fire consultant, in my view, to help resolve that whole scenario.
Why would you think that building control would have a better understanding of the regulatory requirements than you?
Because they sign them off every day.
But as the project architect, using the title that was given to you, Was that not your responsibility, at least in part, to understand and have a view?
But I did understand and have a view, but it's been contradicted by the other parties. I mean, you can probably appreciate just from the volume of email correspondence on it, and I've also alluded to the fact that there were meetings which generated some of those proposals. There was something that had to be resolved, and in coordinating the building control approvals process, I had to get it into a shape that was recognised and agreed by everyone to achieve that.
Yeah. Okay. You refer to 60-minute and 120-minute party wall ratings. Mm-hmm. Is that because you thought Harley was proposing fire stops and not cavity barriers?
No, I think Harley were always proposing cavity barriers. I think building control for quite some time became fixated with the idea that it was fire stops, and to my mind and to Harley's mind, they weren't.
Right, well, we'll look at that a little bit more closely as we go through the documents next. Can you go, please, to SEA 000129906? And this is an email from you to Mr. Lamb and Simon Lawrence at Ryden. Kevin Lamb is at Harley, Simon Lawrence at Ryden. Copy to Bruce Soanes and others. And you can see that there's an attachment, fire strategy. Hi, Kevin. As per the telephone conversation, I've asked the question of Exover on the fire break, note the words, but not on anything back. To me, the fire breaks would have to follow the ratings of the party walls, which are shown on the fire plan attached. You can see some of the low-level apartments are separated by 120 minutes and others by 60 minutes. It looks from that, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Crawford, that you were thinking there about fire stopping, and not cavity barriers. Yes?
No, I can see why you might think that, but the issue had originally come from the correspondence and the meetings with building control, who kept coming back to this notion that it was a fire stop. My understanding at the start that it wasn't. They were making some arguments as to why it might be, and I was putting myself in their frame of mind to think, well, maybe it could be, but I couldn't see how it could be. So in a sense, I'm challenging that proposition. I mean, collectively as a team, we'll try to work out what the actual solution was. And there are parts lower down the building where it is actually a fire stop because of its curtain wall coming into the floor slab as opposed to a bit of overclad. So there's a room for a slight misinterpretation depending which part of the building you're looking at.
Right. I think two things come out of that answer, which I just want to follow up briefly, if I can. The first is you say the issue did originally come from the correspondence and the meetings with building control.
Yeah.
I think it's right that we don't see your engaging building control on this issue until later in March.
Yes, but we'd had workshops on site with building control, and one of the things that was discussed was the cavity barrier strategy.
Yes, you say workshops, and you mentioned these workshops yesterday. Do you remember whether any written record was made of these workshops at which these matters were discussed?
I personally, beyond the notes I had in my sketch pad, was not making formal notes.
Well, we saw one of those yesterday, the one that said fire strategy not approved. You didn't make any other notes of these workshops, correct?
Not that I've been able to trace them.
No. And have you seen or been shown any other written record of these workshops in the course of putting your witness statement together?
Not from the information that we had, but they were very. I think sometimes it's mentioned on the back of the design team meetings, because what would happen is you have the design team meeting, then Ryden would bring in either Harley and or building control, and you'd have a sort of workshop off the back of it, let's say.
Well, forgive me for just taking a time out on this for a moment, Mr. Crawford, and just pursuing this. You came into the project in the summer of 2014. When was the first workshop with building control you attended?
I'd have to go back and check.
All right, you can't
I
remember.
mean, I tried to put together, based on the meetings I had in my Outlook diary when I thought those occurred, because there are sort of references to meetings in some emails, and also in relation to some of the design team meetings. Also, Ryden was having separate meetings with building control, so whether I ended up just sitting in those is very difficult to definitively say when all of them were.
Well, how regularly did they happen?
There was probably there were distinct meetings where the strategy was discussed and markups were done, and those ones are easy to pinpoint. The ones in relation to the cladding, there's at least two or three.
2 or 3 during the whole of your involvement in the project?
Yeah, I think there's one before Christmas. I think there's one about middle of February. There's one late March, April-ish, something like this.
Those are quite specific recollections, Mr. Crawford, of these meetings.
Yes.
I don't think we see any sign of those in your witness statement.
Possibly not, because we
that?
couldn't pin
Why is
down,
that?
because we couldn't pin down precise dates and times. They were quite they were quite informal meetings, and this is why I'm sort of making the sort of connection to them happening off the back of maybe design team meetings and so on. But drawings were put out and they were discussed, and you remember them because you remember specific items in the meetings. But
You've given us 3 such meetings. Christmas 14, we're just getting this down. February 15, March 15.
March, April. And
March,
this is the
April.
problem. I can't say definitively because I don't have.
Trying the best you can to remember who was present at each of those meetings.
Harley and building. There was building control meetings. There's 2 or 3 Harley. There's at least 2 or 3 workshops, and some of them had both.
Right. Who from Harley? Let's start with them. Who was present at each of those?
In some instances, it was Ray and Ben, and in some instances, Kevin.
And who from building control, please?
John and Paul. But Paul, not necessarily all of them, but John certainly.
And can you remember what occasioned or caused each of these meetings to happen when they did?
Ryden were meeting the parties in the background, and I think they strategically saw them as, let's have a discussion on this or that, or let's say they were aware of the issues that were arising from the development of the cladding package.
Well, what issues arose from the development of the cladding package that occasioned the Christmas 14 meeting?
I can say specifically.
What issues that arose out of the cladding package occasioned the February 15 meeting?
I mean, I think the way I'd phrase it is that there's the initial conversation about the cavity barriers that precipitated a meeting with building control and Harley to help resolve it, and I suspect that was the one before Christmas, and possibly again the one round about mid to end February.
Right, and same question in relation to the March-April meeting. What issues arising out of the cladding package occasioned that meeting?
That's a discussion, the progress of the building and the materials that were being used on the building.
Okay, I mean, you've given us some quite detailed evidence just now about 3 meetings at which Harley and building control individuals were present, and we don't get any of that from your witness statement. And my question is, why not?
Well, I suppose the reasons that I'm making clear now is that we didn't have anything concrete to pin the date. We couldn't pin the dates on them, and we couldn't pin the precise, let's say, conversations, the notes. I mean, this is purely recollection. My memory, I knew meetings took place. Even the dates I'm giving you, I'm not sure. It could have been month this way or month that way. we don't have records to definitively say. I just know those meetings took place.
Can you explain to us, please, why you can remember those meetings in a little bit of detail, at least now, when giving evidence to the inquiry today, but couldn't do so or didn't do so?
But
you produced your statement in November 2018.
I did have those. I did have that recollection when I wrote the statement, witness statement.
But we don't, I think, find any reference to these workshop meetings in the statement, do we, Mr. Crawford? I just want to know why that is.
It's a good point. Probably they should have been in there. I mean, they were discussed in putting the statement together, but the statement was done limited resources and time, and I couldn't be definitive. I suppose there's reluctance to put anything in when you can't be pinpoint. It's like something's happened and you remember bits of it, but was it December? Was it January? Exactly who was at which one? I mean, it's
right. The second thing that arose out of that answer, which is now several pages back in the transcript, I have it at page 12, is where you say that you were talking, I think, about parts lower down the building where it's actually a fire stop because of its curtain wall coming into the floor slab, as opposed to a bit of overclad. So there's room for a slight misinterpretation depending on which part of the building you're looking at.
Although I don't think that's necessarily what was being discussed there.
Well, looking back at the email, if we can come back to where we were, you are expressing an opinion, aren't you, to Mr. Lamb, that the fire breaks would have to follow the ratings of the party walls, because you say, to me, they would have to follow the ratings of the party walls.
Yeah, I think this is after I'd had the conversation with Paul Hanson, where he kind of implied that that's what they should do, and I thought I probably adopted his opinion in that respect.
Well, when was that conversation?
There was there's an email, I think. What date is this?
6th of March 2015.
Well, it might have been in one of the workshops, or it could have been in one of the emails around about then. I don't know.
Right.
There's a lot of confusion over let's say, there's difference of opinion on what the rating should be and where they should apply.
Right. Coming back to my original question, having gone through this, would you accept that in this email you are expressing the opinion about fire stopping and not cavity barriers, which is why you say that they would have to follow the ratings of the party walls?
No, I've used the term fire breaks, which is not fire stopping. To be honest, I've never thought there should be fire stopping within the build-up. The notion of the fire stopping came from building control. And I was trying to reconcile in my head why they thought that, whether it's that they thought because the edge of the building has let's say the upper floor's concrete slab, and it has a built-in there's a built-in beam that runs between the columns, so it's cast in, it's actually part of the structure. And because building control kept putting forward this notion that it's fire stopping, I thought, well, okay, are they seeing this as the edge of the slab and somehow the cladding fitting in front of that and it being fire stopping? And so there's a confusion as to, because normally the fire stopping would go to the back line of a cladding wall. So, for example, say you didn't have that concrete upstand and you had SFS, for example, sitting on the slab, or structural SFS mounted to the front, you would have fire stopping to the back of the, let's say, CP board or something. That's how you do it in a new construction. Typically, you might do it in new construction. So I think what's happened was the seeds of trying to understand the thinking of building control. I had to get to a point where building control agreed with our interpretation of what was being proposed, and that was part of this process. It may be that the terminology was getting confused in some of the emails, or the adopted position was shifting in thinking, but from my perspective it was always started as cavity barriers. I didn't agree with the cavity barrier strategy that Harley had, but I was trying to get to a position with building control that they would accept what we were proposing, that our interpretation was acceptable to them. At the end of the day, they were signing it off and they had the last word on compliance. So there had to be an agreed position.
Two further questions on this, and then we'll move on from it. First, it's right, isn't it, that we don't see anywhere in this email you telling Mr. Lamb that you'd had a discussion with Paul Hanson about the fire break requirements and that you were reflecting his views. Why is that?
Well, not in this email, but...
No, why is that?
Well, as I said, there's a number of workshops, and that's where Kevin got the 90 from, or 60, you'd have thought it's 60 at that point, because there's definitely a meeting, and I'm sure it's the pre-Christmas one, where we sat with building control, and they made and they put forward this notion of marrying up to the compartment wall ratings. So that's where that's come from, and there's been conversations, obviously, in between, and then that's generated my what I've written in that email.
Where did these workshops take place?
On site.
You see, according to the RBKC records, we have the dates of site visits of 29th of August, 29th September, 24th November, 27th November, and then none till the 15th of May 2015. Now, if that's correct, where do these workshops fit into that?
But, sorry, you're talking about site visits by RBKC? That's completely separate.
Right. RBKC, yes, building control.
Oh, sorry, RBKC building control.
Yes. Sorry,
Yeah.
by RBKC I meant building control site visits.
Right.
So how do your workshops fit into that?
Can you read the dates again, sorry?
Yes, 29th September, 24th November, 27th November, all 2014. And there's one in August as well. And then none till the 15th of May 2015, Mr. Crawford.
Okay. To me, they were definitely on site within the early portion of 15. I mean, those earlier dates could all have been credible ones, which I may or may not have been at.
Right, you can see why I'm pressing this, because there are other people we'll have to ask about this, and this is the first we've...
Yes, no, I understand it, but this perhaps is the reason why I was so reticent, or we were so reticent to put it into witness statement, because they didn't have the precise dates. I'm just aware that there were a series of meetings and can't specifically point to when they were.
I see. Well, let's move on, because later on the same day, you actually emailed Paul Hanson at RBKC Building Control, and let's look at that. It's SEA 000000252. And this is an email from you to him, as I say, at 15:49, copied to John Hoban at RBKC Building Control, Simon Lawrence, Kevin Lamb, and others. And you make reference to some attachments at the top there. Hi, Paul. Following our conversation this afternoon, this reminded me of another issue. Where are we overcladding, and where we are overcladding, what fire rating do we need to allow for within the wall build-up between apartments, see below, and attached? Now, it looks from that you were actually raising this issue with Mr. Hanson for the first time on the 6th of March.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is that most of the conversation is with John Hoban. I consider Paul to have a greater fire knowledge than John. So in this instance, I've deliberately, as I recall, that I was deliberately giving a sort of, if you like, an abstract description of where, asking about where I thought the cavity barriers were going to go in order to get his view, in order for him to quantify what he thought was the appropriate solution in those locations. Because I felt with John, I was being shown things that I didn't agree with.
Why didn't you ask the question to John Hoban?
But I think the conversations before were with John,
Why are you asking this question of Paul Hanson and not John Hoban?
because in my view, Paul had a greater fire understanding than John.
I see. Turning to the question itself, where we are overcladding, what fire rating do we need to allow for within the wall build-up? You don't identify the design or the materials in the cladding system or the wall build-up as you refer to it, do you?
Not in this email.
No. Were you expecting him to work that out from the drawings you were attaching?
Paul had sat in workshops with us. He knew the scheme. He knew where we were and what we've been working on. So
Right.
it's not like it's something out of the blue.
Well, let's look at the drawings, which we can see listed in your statement at paragraph 230. If we can look at that, please. That's SEA 000-14275 at page 71. You can see that you have, it's paragraph 230, and you can see at the bottom of the page, in the fourth line, you say you attached Harley drawings. And if you just go over the page, please, Mr. Operator, to the top of page 72, you say, and I'm afraid it's split over 2 pages, building control could have been aware. Could we just go back to back to the bottom of page 230? You say, I note by the combination of Harley drawings and C 1059-100 Rev A, building control could have been aware of a number of the materials proposed for the overcladding system. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
So you say they could have been aware, but they could have, of course, but you didn't draw to their specific attention the materials that you were proposing to use, did you?
No, we had a workshop where the specific materials were discussed.
I say workshops. Was this email the first time you had provided drawings relating to the overcladding system to building control?
That depends when the workshop took place, because we had been having systematic meetings with them discussing what was happening in terms of the building envelope. So I don't agree that they wouldn't have known what was going on, but I can't specifically give you dates and times.
Was Mr. Soanes at any of these workshops that you refer to?
Not that I recall, no.
Right. Did you report back to Mr. Soanes about what you had discussed at these workshops?
I may have done.
Did Mr. Soanes know about the workshops?
He'd have known that the workshops were going on, the meeting and site.
You say he would have done. Do you have a recollection of actually telling him, such as, Bruce, I'm going to a workshop, or I've just been at a workshop?
6 years ago, no.
Now, you don't explain in your email what you wanted Mr. Hanson to do with these drawings, did you? We can go back to the email if you like.
Well, as I mentioned before, we'd had a series of workshops and the cladding had been discussed. So I don't think this was a case of just firing something off to someone blindly, because they had followed and understood, in my mind, what was happening with the scheme from the workshops and interactions that had taken place on site.
At these workshops, did you hand drawings to RBKC Building Control for them to take away, or did you show them the drawings and then take them away yourself?
No, they were quite informal, and I remember they were almost always with Simon. He kind of sort of orchestrated them, Simon Lawrence, and we sat with them. Sometimes Paul as well, and Harley representatives, and we discussed the drawings on table, and John usually took things away.
Right.
I mean, John, I would summarise as being quite old school in terms of he liked paper copies, and he he'd always say, "Oh, I've got to go to the next job, so I'm going to take this with me," and this kind of thing.
Right. I see. Okay. So when you emailed Mr. Hanson on the 6th of March 2015
Yeah.
and sent him these drawings, were you just expecting him to refresh his memory about what had happened at any of these workshops and then answer the question from that?
Quite. I mean, he knew the project, he knew the scheme.
I see. And let's see the response he gives to you. SEA 00012927, page 1, please. It's a response to you, copy to John Hoban at RBKC Building Control, 10th of March, 11:49. Hi, Neil. This is a B3 matter, so it's really John Hoban's reference. But effectively, if you mean fire resistance, the walls between apartments are compartment walls, so the construction should achieve the same fire time as the elements of construction for the building. The fire time depends upon the height of the building, as described in 1A of Table 2 ADB. You see that?
Yes.
He's saying cavity barriers should have the same fire resistance as compartment walls. Now, let's just go back to your statement, please, page 72, and let's look at paragraph 231 together. You say there, having referred to his email of the 10th of March, you say, I did not agree with Building Control's response because I think Paul had misunderstood the question I was asking, which was in relation to the fire rating within the, I think I should say, external wall cavity on the compartment lines, as opposed to party walls between apartments on the floor plate, which were already defined on the fire strategy drawings. I asked a further question to clarify the nature of my query the next day. So you say you thought that Building Control had got it wrong. Yes?
Yes.
And that you'd misunderstood the question. Is one of the reasons that he'd misunderstood the question was that you hadn't given him proper context and told him what the materials were and given him any kind of guidance as to the design of the overcladding system?
No, I think, going back to what I said earlier, you had Kevin's email. Kevin's email, I understood off the back of the workshop that he'd assumed the rating that had been implied in the workshops. I was going back to Paul because I understood his, let's say, fire understanding generally overall to be greater than John's. And so what I was doing is, I knew he was primarily concerned with B1 and B5 issues, but I thought, okay, if I describe it in abstract terms, let's see if his response marries up with John's, because it may be that they operate in different portions of the Part B regs, but his insight may be more in line with ours, which would satisfy me that we were doing the right thing and that we could get it signed off, which is the ultimate objective.
Either way, one thing you're not talking about here is cavity barriers, are you? Neither of you.
No, I'm trying to get him to say whether his interpretation is, should it be a cavity barrier or a fire stop, because John's interpretation had been fire stop.
Well, let's move on. Your initial view that you'd given to Exover and Harley, as you'd said, was that the fire breaks had to match the rating of the party wall. We saw that, didn't we?
Yes, which had come from Building Control.
Well, you say that had come from Building Control. And so it's right, isn't it, that at the time you actually agreed with Hanson's advice, didn't you, Mr. Hanson's advice?
Well, I think that advice had come from John originally.
All right. Mr. Hoban's advice. Your initial view that you'd expressed to Exover and Harley was that fire breaks did have to match the rating of the party wall.
Well, I was adopting his view. I mean, I'm not sure if it was clear in my mind what the rating should be at this point. I mean, this is why I was trying to, let's say, okay, this is Studio E strategy, which I understood. There's the Harley strategy, and there's the Building Control strategy.
Right. Okay, well, let's look at the...
Finish
Sorry, finish your answer.
Yeah. What I'm trying to do is get to a position where building control are in agreement, because ultimately, for the building to be complete, they need to agree that it's compliant. Now, if there's a difference of opinion, the only recourse I've got to trying to resolve that is either having the conversation between the parties to resolve it, and then going to the fire specialists to try and clarify it, let's say, from a perspective of someone at a higher level of authority, at least in terms of fire-related matters. So that's the context in which I was operating. The problem is you're seeing a lot of emails that are all jumbled up with other things, and so I appreciate it's very difficult to assemble that. But that's in my head what was happening and what I was doing at the time.
Well, let's see how far we go with this. If you go to the next document, which is your email the next day, it's SEA 0000260. Now, this is your response both to Paul Hanson and John Hoban at RBKC Building Control, yes?
Yes.
11th of March at 12:30, copied to Harley and indeed Ryden. Hi, Paul, John. To clarify what we were trying to understand here was the requirement for fire stopping within the wall build-up where the cladding cassettes are mounted over the old cladding. Are you saying these should mirror the internal compartments, i.e. 60 minutes and 120 minutes, 60 minutes horizontally at floors? You see that?
Yes.
What did you think the right answer was at that point?
I thought the right answer was to have cavity barriers at the compartment lines in line with our employer's requirement strategy. I mean, that was personally what I believed the correct strategy to be.
But Mr. Hanson isn't talking about cavity barriers in that or in indeed any other location, is he?
Quite.
He's talking about
Fire stopping.
So why, when you responded to him, did you not say to him, look, we're at cross purposes. I want to know about where to put cavity barriers and what those cavity barrier resistances should be, not fire stopping.
But in a sense, that's what I'm asking, because, and I explained this in the pretext beforehand, I didn't understand. I was trying to get my head around why he was thinking it was fire stopping. I think we all were trying to understand this, because to me the ratings were following what you do if you were using fire stopping, and this is why I was giving him this description of the position rather than anything else to try and precipitate out his thinking of why was he adopting a fire stopping perspective rather than a cavity barrier perspective.
But Mr. Crawford, your reply to him, which we've just looked at, where you clarify what you're trying to understand, is, quote, the requirement for fire stopping within the wall build-up. So you're not talking about cavity barriers, you're asking him about fire stopping.
Yes, but that's because I'm quoting what he's asked for.
Well, did you understand the difference between cavity barriers and fire stopping?
Yes, I mean, I've spent my entire career doing curtain walling systems, stick systems, where you do fire stopping, and then brick skin windows where you put brick skinned SFS construction external walls where you use cavity barriers. So I understood the difference in where you can apply them. What I was trying to understand was where he was coming from, particularly in relation to the fact that it was overcladding and what he perceived as the edge of the slab or back of slab relative to the back of cladding. So is it back of slab to back of the new cladding or back of slab to the old cladding? To me, I didn't understand where he was coming from in terms of his fire stopping classification, full stop. So I was trying to get inside his head to get him to explain it or qualify it.
Would it, I mean, this is a gentleman with whom you say you'd had these informal workshops on a number of occasions. Would it not have been simpler just to come clean, explain your view, and ask him to comment?
But I think we had up to then the proposals that we discussed with them was a cavity barrier solution.
Right. Well, let's look at another email. SEA 000-12953, please, page 1. This is an email to you from Ben Bailey, and I should just show you the emails below it. We start with the one I showed you earlier from Kevin Lamb. This is at the bottom of page 1 over to 2. Do you see that?
Yes.
Which we looked at before, and indeed yesterday. And then up the page, we have your email to Kevin Lamb of the 10th of March. Please see response from Paul Hanson regarding cladding fire breaks attached, which is how it gets into Harley. You see that? Mm-hmm. And then we have your email at the top of the page. Ben Bailey's response comes back to you 18th of March at 11:17 to you and to Simon Lawrence. So this is coming from Harley to you. Hi, Neil. The fire break supplier, who it seems was involved with Grenfell at the specification stage, has made a comment, and I'd like to clarify what fire breaks are required. Could you confirm what the vertical and horizontal requirement is, please? The spec and supplier technical reps say very different things. Do you see that?
Yes.
Now, let's just pursue this a bit further, because you say something about this in your statement. Can we have that, please, at page 72? And at paragraph 233, towards the bottom of page 72, you say you have had a conversation with building control in the morning, and John Hoban, building control, emailed me afterwards saying, and we'll look at that email in a moment, just on the statement, you refer to a discussion with building control in the morning. Who was that with, please?
I think it was John Hoban.
I think it was John Hoban. Okay. Now let's look at the email you refer to. You've given the reference in your statement. It's SEA 000-12963. Can we just look at that? 12963. And it's his response to the message you had sent to Paul Hanson. So it looks like your efforts to go to a higher authority on fire had not succeeded, because Mr. Hoban was coming back to you. Mr. Hoban says to you and to Paul Hanson copied in, Dear Neil, the Building Regulations 2010 as amended, Grenfell Tower, Grenfell Road refurbishment. Thank you for returning my call this morning. Further to my conversation with you today, I would confirm that the fire time for the new elements of structure, new columns, beams, sections of compartment floor, etc., in Grenfell Tower is 120 minutes, as specified in Section 1A of Table 2, Appendix A of Approved Document B. I would also draw your attention to Diagram 33 of Approved Document B and highlight the detail between compartment floors and external cladding. In the meantime, should you wish to discuss any other aspects of the project, Neil, then please do not hesitate to call me, and it gives you a contact number. You see that?
Yes.
So he's saying that when he refers to ADB, he's giving his view that the fire time for the new elements of structure should be 120 minutes. Now, my first question is, what did you discuss with John Hoban during your conversation with him that morning, which preceded that email?
I think this may have been in relation to the new works that were going on in the lower floors. So I think these changes that were happening around about then with the entrance lobby and the community space and some new steelwork going in, supporting steelwork, I think it might have been connected to that.
I see. He says in his email, further to my conversation with you today, I would confirm, and he goes on to talk about the new elements of structure and 120 minutes, etc. Was what he was confirming there all in relation to matters in the lower part of the building?
I believe so.
So the conversation, and indeed this email, or at least that paragraph of this email, is not about cavity barriers within the cladding structure, is it?
I don't think so, no, that section.
Did you have any other discussion with him about other elements of the cladding, such as insulation, ACM panels, etc.?
At that time, in relation to this email, I couldn't say definitively.
Did you go back to him and say, look, actually, my question, and you can see this from the second email down, was where we are overcladding, what fire rating do we need to allow for within the wall build-up between apartments? Did you not think to press him on that issue so that his answer didn't simply relate to the lower part of the building, but the whole building?
I may have done, I don't recall. I mean, this first section, it may have been that he misinterpreted that in relation to John Hoban's, Paul Hanson's commentary. I'm not sure, actually.
Right. Okay. Well, let's then move on. It's right to say, isn't it, that you didn't respond to Mr. Hoban and say that you disagreed with him, did you?
I couldn't say, I don't recall.
Let's look at SEA 000130001, please. Moving on in time, this is an email from Kevin Lamb of Harley to you of the 25th of March, when he sends you some drawings. You can see them there, set out as attachments. And he says, Simon, further to our meeting yesterday, I'm so sorry, this is an email to Simon Lawrence, but it's copied to you and Bruce Soanes. Simon, further to our meeting yesterday, please find attached details for the fire breaks, all now upgraded to 120 minutes. So that's where that happens. And next, before I start asking you about that, I'd like you to go, please, to SEA 000130022. Now, we need to look at the whole email chain. As you can see, the last email in it is at the top of page 1 from you to Simon Lawrence, copied to Simon O'Connor of the 27th of March 2015. But if you scroll down to the bottom, please, you can see that the first email in it is an email from Ricky Kay, if you could be shown that bottom email, which is on page 2 and over to page 3. Page 2 at the bottom will do. This is an email that you didn't receive yourself, but it was sent by Ricky Kay of Cider Rise to Ben Bailey, copied to Kevin Lamb and Mark Stapley at Harley, among others, and it's the 26th of March 2015. Hi Ben, apologies for the delay. Please find below extract from the approved document B of the building regulations. And then he sets out an extract from it. And you can see that it says cavity barriers, integrity 30, insulation 15. You see?
Yes.
And Mr. Kay, who I should say is the National Facades Manager at Cider Rise, says, here you can see that it clearly states that 30 minutes fire integrity and 15 minutes insulation is all that is required from a cavity fire barrier. This is reference to rain screen cladding applications where the cavity barrier is deemed to be on the outside of the building. Our RH 2590/30 will offer 90 minutes fire integrity and 30 minutes fire insulation, therefore exceeds minimum requirements. 120-minute fire rating is generally the industry standard for curtain wall to concrete slab edge fire stopping, where the fire stop is located on the inside of a building and is considered to be a continuation of the floor slab. Please get in touch. So you see that, and this is, as I say, part of the email string that you received in copy, and we see that from the next but one email. I'll just run up with you if I can. The next one is Ben Bailey to Simon Lawrence and Simon O'Connor at Ryden, copied to Harley, others in Harley. Simon As discussed, please see the email below from the fire break supplier. There is quite a large cost difference between Siderise and the spec recommend and upgrading to the 120-minute barriers we discussed on Tuesday. Can you forward this to the client's representative for approval, please? And then it comes to you. You see, Simon Lawrence on the 27th of March sends it to you, sends the email string to you. Hi, Neil. Following Tuesday's design meeting, Harley via their supply chain are questioning the rating of the cladding fire breaks. Apparently, by going to 2 hours, we discussed, has a cost increase of around £12,000. Their supplier is saying it needs only to be 30 minutes everywhere, as per the regs extract below. Could you take a look to see what you think and discuss with John Hoban, please? You see that?
Yes.
And then your response to that is on the 27th of March, a little bit later in the morning, to Simon Lawrence, copy to Simon O'Connor. Hi, Simon. Have spoken with John, and he wasn't happy with Harley's email, as we are talking about fire stopping as opposed to cavity barriers. I've explained again the specifics of our scenario, and he will have a conversation with Paul Hanson to see if there's a reduced spec that they can agree to, and will then speak with Harley's directly. Now, I've shown you the whole of that email string. So my questions on it are this. Do you accept that the long and the short of this email exchange is that if you were talking about cavity barriers as opposed to fire stops, then 120 minutes was not necessary, and that the upgrade to 120 minutes for cavity barriers would be to increase cost and possibly delay?
Absolutely.
Yes. Do you agree that there was some pressure on site so far as you could understand, to avoid having to specify cavity barriers with a resistance of 120 minutes?
Yes.
Yeah. And the main concern was cost and delay as opposed to fire safety.
Well, I can't speak on behalf of the other participants in that conversation, but you might read that into what they've written, yes.
Now, if we then move forward, we can see what you say to John Hoban. Go please to SEA 0000264, because we can see you forward Mr. Kay's email to John Hoban. You see that? And here we see on page 1 the Ricky Kay 26th of March email, yes?
Yes.
Which you then send on to John Hoban on the 27th of March at 10:53 in the morning. Mm-hmm. Hi, John. There has been a lot of conversation on site about the cavity barrier requirements to be fitted between the existing concrete external wall panels and the new external rain screen aluminium cassettes. Can you please see the proposal by the cladding contractor below and confirm that if this is acceptable to you? So you're now talking about, quite clearly, I would suggest to you, about cavity barriers, yes?
Yes.
Yes, and we've seen what Mr. Kay says, and you asked Mr. Hoban if he will confirm Siderise's proposal. If we go back, please, to SEA 000130022, here's the email we looked at a moment ago of 11:03. So about 15 minutes or so after you send the Ricky Kay email to John Hoban, you tell Simon Lawrence at Ryden, hi Simon, I've spoken with John, I'm assuming that's John Hoban?
Yes.
Yeah. And he wasn't happy with Harley's email as we're talking about fast stopping as opposed to cavity barriers. So there we see the issue.
Yeah, so can I just add, I mean, to me, I mean, that's making it quite clear that you can see that John thinks it's fire stopping and he wants the higher rating.
Yes, and this is an email for you, indeed, and this is an email from you to Simon Lawrence at Ryden, but you don't give your view in this email, do you? You don't say that he's cross purposes.
Well, let's just say from the outset, we had a strategy, and that's our strategy, and I've stuck by it. The fact is that other people have not accepted that strategy or put forward other strategies. In coordinating building control submission, it was my role to get to a point where there was an agreement that building control could sign it off.
Right. Did you actually think that the issue was about fire stopping, as per your initial view, as we saw earlier? Or was your main concern just to go easy with building control in order to get a sign-off?
No, no. My view was that there was cavity barriers to start with. I wanted to entertain some have or tried to entertain some of building control's thinking to understand whether we collectively as a design team missed something. So, for example, there was there may have been some legitimacy to their thinking of it as fire stopping, and hence the higher rating. Test that with the design team, and then get to a position where there was a collective agreement. Ultimately, building control had to agree to whatever solution was being proposed. If they were insistent on a cavity barrier or fire stopping of a higher value, then, well, first of all, you couldn't do fire stopping. That's the reality. But if they insisted on a cavity barrier solution of a higher rating, and that's the only way to get them to sign it off, then you put in a higher rating, and you say, well, okay, you might have been able to argue a lower rating. But a higher rating is going to err on our positive side. So it's,
You were under contract to Ryden at this point.
yes.
Why didn't you simply set out your professional advice to your client in this email to Mr. Lawrence
Well,
about what the cavity barrier rating should be?
well, he knew what our position was.
Right. And why didn't you tell Ryden that you were going to go back to building control and put them right?
Simon knew that's what I was trying to do. He knew that I mean, he'd asked me to speak to building control, and the reason he'd asked me to speak to building control was to try and broker that acceptable solution.
I see. So you were really acting as a broker, your word, between two conflicting views.
I said to broker a solution.
Yes.
I don't consider myself a broker as such.
I see. All right. Mr. Chairman, that may be a convenient moment for a break.
Yes, I was just wondering, since we've gone quite over the hour, whether if we had a slightly longer break at this stage and came back, let's say at 20 past, we might then run up till near 1 o'clock or nearly. Would that be acceptable?
That'd be good.
Yeah.
Right, well, let's do that. We'll break now until 20 past 20 past 11, sorry. And then we'll see if we can get through the rest of the morning. Right, would you like to go with the usher, please?
Thanks.
Right.
Carried away. Right, 20 past 12. No, not 20
Not
past
20 past 12.
20 past 11.
11.
Could we have Mr. Crawford back, please? Right, Mr. Crawford. Now,
Yes.
I think I was being a bit too ambitious when I suggested you could go through the rest of the morning without a break. No, I've suggested to Mr. Millett that he find a convenient place around about 12:05.
Okay,
And that'll
yeah.
give you roughly 45 minutes and then a break and another 45 minutes. All right?
Yes, that's fine.
Yes, Mr.
Mr. Crawford, first of all, can I just correct or fill in some dates of site meetings in the record that we have, and just add a few more so that we're clear. There were meetings on site at the 16th of January, 17th of February, 26th of March, 17th of April, and 22nd of April 2015. Yeah, there were site visits, not necessarily meetings on site. And at the moment, we are still exploring who was present. But I didn't want you to think that the list of dates that I'd given you earlier was the only dates that we have in the record. Secondly, just a couple of other questions that arose out of this question about workshops. Did you keep a notebook, an architect's notebook?
I have my sketchbooks, which I generally carry with me, and would, depending how involved I am in the meetings, I may or may not take notes or sketch in.
Did you keep a diary of your appointments?
Generally, if I'm out of the office, it would go into the Outlook diary, so I'd put on at Grenfell site or whatever. It's not foolproof, but if, for example, if you knew you had a design team meeting coming up, and you're going to be out Tuesday morning, then I usually put that in. So.
From about Christmas 2014, where was your office? Was it at London Bridge, or were you still in Rainville Road?
14. Trying to remember when we moved. I can't remember the precise dates. I need to check when we moved.
Do you remember whether you entered into your Outlook diary the workshops that you were to attend?
Some of those workshops are kind of informal, off the back of design team meetings and things like that. So that's why I don't have formal record of them.
Right. Just to go back then to the email string or traffic that we were looking at before the break. We now come to late March 2015. What I'm going to do is take these quite quickly, just to show you the documents, and ask for one or two questions on them. Go please first to SEA 000130034. This is an email from you to John Hoban at RBKC, 30th of March 2015. Hi John, Ben Bailey from Harley's is who you might ask for, and you give a phone number. Do you know whether Mr. Hoban ever did speak to Ben Bailey?
I don't know.
Did you ever follow it up?
I can't recall. I mean,
right. Then we go, please, to the next document, which is SEA 000130036, please. This is John Hoban's reply to you, which you've seen before. Perhaps we haven't. It's similar to the one we saw before. And he says, "Dear all," and he refers again to the building regulations, "please find detail below, a copy of an email sent to various persons on the 20th of March 2015. And you can see that underneath it. We looked at that earlier this morning, and it is quite similar in layout. Concerning the topic relating fire stopping of the compartment floors to the building, I would advise you that it is my interpretation of diagram 33 of approved document B that the detail between compartment floors and external cladding is not a cavity barrier. Therefore, it must be fire-stopped to at least the standard of the existing compartment floor, 120 minutes. Therefore, the methods described in clause 913 would not be appropriate in this particular case. See that?
Yes.
And then you reply the next day, if we can bring that up, please. That's SEA 0000265. And you say, hi, John. Unfortunately, this problem is not going away. The subject of fire barriers is causing a lot of concern on site, not least because of programme and cost. I have forwarded a copy of diagram 33 and the typical floor detail, and we are all miffed as to why this detail is not a cavity barrier in this location. Please see attached. You see that?
Yes.
The relationship between the back of the slab and the cladding remains the same as the original cladding, concrete, is retained, and therefore the integrity of this relationship at floor level has not been affected. The new cladding constitutes an additional layer applied on top, not a new floor slab interface, and therefore the interpretation is that this constitutes a cavity barrier and not a fire stop. This has now become something of an issue on site due to programme bottleneck, so your earliest response to this would be appreciated. And you attach to that email, as we can see from the attachment, a drawing and you see that, and also a copy, also a copy of BR PDF AD B2 2013. There are two documents. You see that? So you send him a drawing and you sent him
Yes.
ADB, and that turns out to be diagram 33.
Yes, with a red box on.
With a red box. Let's just look at that. That's EXO 00001296. And you can see the red box at the bottom, as you just referred to it. Our fire stopping is in the grey location and not between floor slab, back of retained concrete cladding. You see?
Yes.
Okay, that's your annotation, is it?
Yes.
It is. And as I just said before, you also attached a copy of a drawing, which we can see, if we want to look at it again, was to see if you remember it without having to go to it, was an employer's requirement drawing, which we looked at when we looked at Studio E's cavity barrier design.
I know the drawing.
You know the drawing. Yeah. The question is, did you appreciate that the Studio E design and the Harley design for the location of the cavity barriers was different? Because the cavity barriers had been moved between employer's requirements drawing and the Harley drawings.
In what respect?
Well, they've been moved away from the compartment line slightly.
Not in a material sense, they hadn't.
Okay. Why didn't you send the Harley drawing as opposed to the employer's requirements drawing? Well, let me put that question again. Why did you send them the employer's requirements drawing and not the most up-to-date Harley drawing?
I'd already sent them the Harley drawings.
So why were you sending them the employer's requirement drawing?
More evidence. I mean,
But they were different.
But they're not. You're making a difference that I'm not agreeing with your difference of interpretation. Both the cavity barriers are on the compartment line. That's the significant point.
Did you have any help from Ryden or Harley when you drafted this email that we see?
I'm not aware that I did. I mean, we were having frustrated conversations, which I'm sure you can detect from just the correspondence, in that there was a bottleneck and trying to get John to see our point of view, which we believe to be correct.
What made you now become so clear and, if I may put it this way, trenchant in your view that we're talking now about cavity barriers as opposed to fire stopping? What had made you do that at this point as opposed to earlier in the discussions that we've seen?
Well, I'd argue earlier at the outset, it was pretty clear to me what it should have been. It was a collection of different opinions, and the right thing to do is go through those opinions and verify and check to get the right solution. At this point, it was getting frustrating. I
see. Looking at the next document, which is SEA 00013049, it's an email chain, and again, looking at the bottom email on page 1 and over to page 2, if we can, please. It's not that easy, they're split. But can you see that you send an email to Terry Ashton on the 31st of March 2015. But I'm afraid on the screen you've got the second half of that. I wonder if the 2 pages could be put side by side, pages 1 and 2, please. Mr. Crawford, sometimes the emails go over 2 pages and we have to use some magic. Right, so you see that at the bottom of page 1, this is an email from you, 31st of March at 12:05 to Terry Ashton. Hi, Terry, and then over onto page 2. Can you comment on the history of this item? Please see correspondence below, as it is not clear to me why this item is causing such a difference in interpretation. Can't see anything that seems to reference it in the fire strategy. See that?
Yes.
Did that itself not ring alarm bells with you that the Exova fire strategy was, in some way at least, incomplete?
Not necessarily. I mean, would you expect precise cavity barrier strategy to be covered in a high-level fire strategy document? Not necessarily.
You just described the Exova outline fire safety strategy that you had seen the last iteration of as a high-level fire strategy document. Just to go back to some questions that we were examining together yesterday, did you ever expect Exova to produce anything more than a high-level report, or strategy, as you call it?
High-level outline, interchangeable.
Right. Did the fact that Exova had not solved this question or addressed this question in their outline fire safety strategy not, as I say, alert you to the fact that this was a detail that Exova hadn't covered and needed to, perhaps in the next iteration of the strategy?
In terms of the commentary on B4, would it drill down to specifics of fire stopping, cavity barriers, issues like that? Only if they were, let's say, of a highly specific and non-standard nature.
I mean, by this time, late March 2015, you had had to go to Exova for quite a lot of ad hoc advice, as we've seen. You say in relation to compliance of the Celotex, the ACM. You said yesterday. We've had discussions with them about cavity barriers and fire stopping. Did that not all tell you that Exova now needed to do a full job and give full advice, as opposed to an outline followed up by ad hoc, as and when piecemeal questions and answers?
No, my experience in projects is that it's quite normal to speak to a fire consultant in relation to interpretational issues of building regulations.
Right. And then we see Terry Ashton's response to you on page 1. And he says to you, this isn't something that would necessarily form part of a fire safety strategy for a building. Therefore, it wouldn't have been dealt with in the fire safety strategy for the buildings, for this building. So he actually thinks it's something outside his scope. And then he says, I agree with Ben Kay. I believe that a cavity barrier is all that's required in this application. Even if we were to agree with RBKC, it's difficult to see how a fire stop would stay in place in the event of a fire where external flaming occurred, as this would cause the zinc cladding to fail. I think we've already looked at that yesterday. And we looked at the email at the top of that chain as well yesterday, and I won't go back to that. Let's move on in time then. HAR 000137719. John Hoban emails you twice on the 1st of April, as we see from this exchange. If we go to page 2, please, and halfway down page 2, we can see he emails you on the 1st of April at 9:57, and thanks you for your email and for the attached drawing showing typical cladding details. The matter has now become more clearer. I'd advise you I have no adverse comments to make on the proposal shown on your drawing, he refers to the drawing, with regards to compliance with parts B2 and B3 in Schedule 1 of the building regulations. And then he asks for the drawings for the external walls to the boxing club floor, mezzanine floor, and mezzanine plus 1 floor. So that's the lower part of the building, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And then he says that's his impression that the cladding stroke floor junction detail for those particular floors differ from that shown on drawing 1279, etc. And he wants to review those prior to giving further comments on the cladding. Going up then to page 1, about the middle of the page, he says to you in his second email of the 1st of April, in the first substantive paragraph, I would advise you I have no adverse comments to make on the cladding proposal shown in your drawings with regards to compliance with B2 and B3 in Schedule 1 of the building regulations. You see that?
On our drawings and Harley's drawing, yes.
Exactly. So he's got no adverse comments to make. And then if you go to the next, yeah, that's right. So I don't think we need to see anything else of that document. At the top of the page, you then see that because Mr. Hoban has copied Mr. Lawrence into the response, Mr. Lawrence sends that to Harley, Ben Bailey and Ray Bailey, copied to you, and he says, gents, the building control officer is now in agreement with the fire protection in the cladding being a cavity barrier rather than a fire stop as first thought. And that is where it all ends. Now, the emails we've just been through related to cavity barriers at compartment lines. We've seen that. We've sorted out the mess on that. Did you ever, at any point, seek any guidance from RBKC Building Control about cavity barriers around the windows?
I don't recall seeking specifically, although the general strategy was discussed in the workshops, meetings.
Right. Did you ever ask RBKC Building Control to approve Harley's design as a whole, which omitted cavity barriers around the windows?
They were aware of Harley's scheme.
Yeah, but did you actually ever ask them to approve or comment on Harley's design as a whole, which, as we know, omitted any cavity barriers around the windows?
I may have done. I don't recall.
You don't recall? Okay. We're now going to move on to a different topic, Mr. Crawford, the crown. Now, we know that the design of the crown, and correct me if I'm wrong about this, but that wasn't finalised before the refurbishment went out to tender, was it?
There were some issues relating to how you dealt with facade cleaning and access that could influence its design.
So is the answer to my question, yes, it wasn't finalised before the refurbishment went out to tender?
Yes, that would be correct.
Thank you. And after novation to Ryden in 2014, I think you were then involved in the design of the crown, weren't you?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you give any consideration as to how the crown may perform in the event of a fire?
Just understood it as more aluminium panel.
Did you consider whether cavity barriers may be required between the facade cladding and the crown?
Not out with the strategy that had been agreed already.
You say the strategy that had been agreed already. What was that? What was that strategy?
Around the compartments, maintain the compartments.
I see. Did you ever consider whether cavity barriers may be required along the crown in order to stop lateral fire spread?
You mean vertically?
I suppose it would be vertically. Vertical cavity barriers would be required to stop lateral fire spread.
Yeah.
So yes, that is what I'm asking you. Have you ever considered that?
They were there in the capacity of the compartments. The crown itself is open. It's an open element.
Indeed. And so there would be no compartments in the crown itself?
No.
No. So does it follow that there were no, we know there were no, but that you didn't consider any vertical cavity barriers in the crown in order to stop lateral fire spread?
Because there wasn't a requirement for them, no.
A requirement where?
Within the open portions of the crown.
You say there wasn't a requirement for them. I'm interested in the word requirement. What do you mean?
I'm just trying to quantify what you were saying earlier, which was that you have the compartment of the apartment, if you like, below. Then the crown itself is a series of open panels.
Yes.
So the interlock, it's like a hit and miss fence. So you have the panels doing this.
Yes.
And I mean, the design was essentially there. The only thing that was to be considered was any access coming over the top and whether that would have any implication on the design.
Right. And can I ask you then to look, please, at SEA 13221. This is an email exchange in late May 2019. We can see that the second email down on that page is an email from Kevin Lamb, 29th of May 2015, to Simon Lawrence, copied to you and others at Harley. Neil, please find attached drawings for the crown element for approval. You see that?
Yes.
And clearly he's asking you to approve those, his word, and excuse me. And going up the chain, you say, or you see that you returned comments to him on the 12th of June 2015, and 2 weeks later or so. You attach something called Crown Details SEA Comments. Hi, Kevin, please find attached comments on the Crown drawings. You see that?
Yes.
Can we have a look at those? It's SEA 00003242, please. And we can see there we have the crown. This is a Harley drawing dated 30th of September 2014. At the bottom right hand, you can see that, no need to blow it up. Authored by Kevin Lamb, and it looks like revision 0 because there are no revisions to it. And we can see now your, by now familiar, red capitals. Those are your comments, aren't they?
Yes.
And the stamp B, dated on stamp the 12th of June 2015. Can we see that? Can we see that?
Yes.
And on the columns, we see that you've indicated we can see on the columns that let me ask the question again. On the columns, vertical fire breaks have been indicated, haven't they?
Yes.
Yes. But there's no fire break or cavity barrier indicated at the top of the columns, is there?
That's correct.
So on these drawings, there was a route for fire to spread uninhibited from the columns up to the crown.
Each apartment is a compartment, so you have compartment below, which is enclosed. Then you have a compartment above, and so there's no requirement to protect the compartment to atmosphere. At least this is the interpretation I suppose I might have made from Harley's decision to omit that cavity barrier.
Yeah, yes, because my question, I'm going to ask it again. If you look at the left-hand side, it's easier to look at the left-hand side because the right-hand side is obscured by the stamp. But if you look at the left-hand side of the drawing, you can see that there is a vertical cavity vertical cavity barrier, or fire break as it's called, up the column. Do you see?
Yes.
And it stops before the crown starts, doesn't it?
Yes.
It does. So there is no vertical cavity barrier running up into the crown, is there?
There's running up to the base of the crown.
But not beyond?
Yes.
No, exactly. And that means that there was a route for fire to spread uninhibited from the columns, or up the columns, into the crown vertically.
You say up the columns, but there's a horizontal break at the compartment level below.
At the floor?
Yes, so for example, if you took the floor below, you'd have effectively the compartment delineated with cavity barriers. So if you, for example, that dotted line on the left, where the panel stops, there's a cavity barrier running across that, just off the picture.
Yes.
But the point I'm trying to make is that it's not a continuous column path, which is what you inferred.
No, I understand that. But if a fire broke out in that flat,
Yes.
above the highest horizontal cavity barrier, and the fire came out of the flat into the cladding to the left on the picture here,
It goes straight to
it
atmosphere.
would go straight up into the crown. There'd be nothing to stop it going straight up into the crown.
It'd go into the atmosphere because it's open, effectively.
But there'd be nothing to stop it.
That's correct. It would travel up.
Yes. And there are no cavity barriers indicated at the top of the cladding where it meets the crown. There are no horizontal cavity barriers to stop any fire going up into the crown.
That's correct.
Yes. Now, earlier we identified that the employer's requirement drawings had a horizontal cavity barrier in that location. Do you remember that?
Yes.
So would you agree that this Harley design represents a worsening in terms of compliance with the guidance in approved document B, diagram 33?
I read Ray Bailey's response, his explanation for not including that cavity barrier, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with it.
Right.
Because the primary purpose of the cavity barrier is to protect the compartment. There is no compartment above it, and there's effectively no chimney effect because you're only travelling the distance of one apartment.
Yes. Now, just to go back, I'll let you answer the question, but it's not quite the question. You say you read Ray Bailey's response and his explanation for not including the cavity barrier, and you say you wouldn't necessarily disagree with it. His response is, am I right in thinking, in his witness statement, not a response as a result of a discussion that you had with him at the time? Am I right, Mr. Crawford?
That's correct.
I see. So at the time, this is what I'm focusing on, at the time, Harley's design, and I'm suggesting to you, represented a worsening of the original Studio E design in terms of compliance with the guidance in approved document B.
It may have done, yes.
Did you spot that?
I don't recall.
You were asked by, as we've seen, for your approval, and you send back your comment, but you don't say, well, hold on a moment, we need to continue the vertical cavity barrier into the crown, and we need to have a horizontal cavity barrier at the top of the column. We don't see that, do we?
No.
And do you agree that cavity barriers were, in fact, required in that location?
Not necessarily. I mean, I think I'd agree with Ray's analysis of it.
Well, let's look at ADB diagram 33, please. It's CLG 00000224. Now, can I first take you, please, to paragraph B3, subparagraph 4, at page 67, which is internal fire spread structure. And just to, sorry, 69, I'm so sorry, 69. My fault, that was internals. 67. So if you see that, this is internal fire spread B3, and look at subparagraph 4 with me, please. The building shall be designed and constructed so that the unseen spread of fire and smoke within concealed spaces in its structure and fabric is inhibited. Were you familiar with that principle at the time you were asked to approve these drawings, Mr. Crawford?
General principle, I suppose so, yes.
Yeah. And therefore it wasn't simply a question of protecting the compartment, but the whole structure of the building.
But it's going straight to atmosphere. There's no structure above it.
Well, let's look at the next page in this document, page 82, please. I want you to look at diagram 33 with me. Provision for cavity barriers. You see that?
Yes.
And the very top item there, and we saw this, I think, yesterday. It says closed top of cavity. You see that?
Yes.
So there's quite a clear requirement there, isn't there, that a cavity barrier is required to close the top of the cavity, as it says.
No, I disagree entirely, and for the reasons I gave yesterday. First of all, this is guidance. Secondly, it shows closing a cavity that opens into a further enclosed space. Therefore, it's protecting the unseen enclosed space within the roof.
Did you ever go back to Harley and ask them, or just seek to discuss with them, whether or not you actually needed to close the top of the cavity that you say vented into the atmosphere? Or whether you could essentially treat diagram 33 as inapplicable? Did you do that?
I don't recall having that conversation.
I mean, if it was your view at the time that there was no need for a cavity barrier at the top of the cladding to close the top off, if that was your view at the time, was there any reason why you didn't express that to Harley and explain it?
I think Harley are pretty seasoned contractors. They wouldn't be using a diagram like this to orientate what they were doing.
Is there a reason why you didn't ask Exova, given that they were a resource that you frequently had resort to?
What we'd say is that we obviously did show cavity barrier in that location. Harley chose to omit it. Maybe I did see it, maybe I didn't. Maybe I trusted their experience and my interpretation on this. I wouldn't necessarily verify every move with every consultant.
Do you actually remember going through the mental thought processes of looking at diagram 33, considering the top of the cladding in the diagram we've seen, and thinking to yourself, well, diagram 33 doesn't apply because in the picture, the cavity to be closed enters into an enclosed space. We haven't got that here, so it's irrelevant. Did you actually go through that thought process?
It's a very long time ago to know what specific thought processes you went through. I mean, I had a familiarity with Section 9 and Diagram 33 that's built up over many projects. So it's probably fair to say that my intuition in those things is informed by that experience.
Had you ever come across a situation before in your professional practice where you had decided for yourself that a provision or part of diagram 33 didn't apply, such as closing the top of the cavity, as in this case?
That's a very specific question, a very specific element. I wouldn't be able to commit to you on that without doing research.
I mean, when not applying the provisions of diagram 33, were you drawing on any industry learning, education, CPD experience?
Well, I think, as I mentioned yesterday, diagram 33 to me is quite a poor diagram when you consider what it's expected to cover in its totality, or if you were to interpret in the sort of the way you're doing. There are many external wall construction types, some of which I listed yesterday, and specifically double skin construction, which is, by double skin, I mean, possibly not what you're thinking of, but for example, this is really, I suppose, where I started to question very much the provisions set out in diagram 33 in section 9. A double skin facade is typically where you have, well, it's usually double glazed, and then you have an outer skin. The inner skin isn't occupable. It's used for environmental reasons usually. The two skins aren't necessarily transparent, but invariably are, and they can be used for environmental reasons where you actually utilise the chimney effect. So you have no cavity barriers, and the chimney can either be horizontal. You find ones that are horizontal, vertical, or just box. It's not the same as a winter garden where you actually occupy the space. So that space is typically, I don't know, maybe 300, 500 wide. You can usually get into it for maintenance. Probably the best example that people would know is the Shard. And there it is in glass, so you can obviously see what's happening inside that double skin facade. But there are many buildings that use double skin facades like that where you can't see in. Technically, you'd argue you'd have to use, well, your argument is you'd be using diagram 33 or section 9, but you can't apply that and still maintain those operational principles. So very quickly you find the severe limitations to that sort of literal application of section 9 and diagram 33. I mean, you can't really apply it, in my opinion, to curtain walls. For the reasons I mentioned yesterday, you can't apply it to, for example, many other forms of complex external wall construction. The example that's shown here is literally looks like a two-up, two-down house with traditional double masonry skin wall, and yes.
Mr. Crawford, I'm sorry, I don't want to cut across you. Yeah. It was really a yes or no answer. Let me try it a different way. Was the thinking that you're now explaining at some length to us here in this hearing room something which went through your mind at the time, or is this something that you've rationalised after the event?
I think I used the word intuition before. I think what happens is you glean knowledge and gain knowledge as you go along, and some processes of what you do are almost are subconscious, become subconscious to you based on your experience. What I thought specifically at that time, I don't recall. I mean, it was 6 years ago.
Well, before I leave this topic, let me just ask one more question. You were asked to approve this drawing by Harley. Did you ever give any thought to how a fire might be able to spread uninhibited between or among a set of PE cord panels across the crown of this building in the absence of any cavity barriers, either within the crown or at the top of the columns?
In the absence of any cavity barrier, I'd understand the fire just to go straight out to atmosphere.
You say you would understand it. Was that your thinking at the time?
I have no idea what I thought at the time. I wasn't consciously noting everything I thought at the time. I mean, this is what I'm trying to explain. I mean, I don't know what I thought at the time. I mean, obviously thought it was...
Right. Now we're going to go to a different topic, which is windows. We will have a break very shortly, again, Mr. Crawford, for your benefit. But can we get into the topic? I'm going to turn to drawings of windows first, if I may. Can I ask you please to be shown SEA 00003040, page 7. And before we get into the detail of that, let me ask you a more general question. Were you aware that there were 2 Harley drawings which have the drawing number C1059-302 revision D, each marked approved for construction?
So what do you mean by that? There's two different drawings with the same number? Or is it
Yes.
with different content? Is that,
Yes.
no, but then I've only been looking at the content per drawing.
Right. Let's look at the first, which is the one on the page, or the screen. That's page 7. Now, we're looking here, just so you're clear, about the window jamb condition, okay?
Yeah.
And that, as you can see, is stamped by you on the 16th of January 2015, and you mark it A, status A, yes?
Yes.
So you're recording that it conforms to design intent and is approved for construction.
No. We don't approve for construction. Architects don't approve drawings. They comment on them. The approved for construction is something Harley's put on for their own purposes.
Okay, but Harley approve it for construction, and then you stamp it status A, and really that's it, isn't it? It then goes to construction. What else intervenes to stop it being constructed based on that?
Ryden ultimately approved for construction.
Oh, I see.
We don't turn around to Harley and say, yes, go and start manufacturing this.
I see. Who at Ryden would give the final approval for construction based on the drawing, do you think?
The Ryden management team.
Who?
I don't know who. I mean, they have their own internal people at the front, project managing, the people assembling the packages, managing the costs,
Right.
the procurement, the warranties, everything else on individual packages. We're not party to that. We just comment in abstract on architectural intent.
Yeah. Well, let's come back to this and let's call this the stamped version because it's got your stamp on it. All right.
Yeah.
So this is the stamped version. And there's a second one, and it would be wonderful if we could put these up side by side. This is the offline version at HAR 000-10440. And it would be good if we could have these two side by side. Yes, I think that does it. Thank you. Now, we'll call that the unstamped version. So just to be clear, we've got the stamped version on the left-hand side of the screen and the unstamped version on the right-hand side of the screen. All right?
Yes.
And in both cases, we can see that the drawings are originally dated the 20th of August 2014 in the little box at the bottom next to the lamb. You see that?
Yep.
And they're both given construction issue revision D, dated the 13th of January 2015, in the box at the bottom. You see that?
Yes.
Yes. And they are both, as you can see, drawings of the window jamb condition. Yes?
Mm-hmm.
Now, Mr. Lamb has described in his proposed evidence, in his statement, at paragraph 31, and I just want to put to you what he says, because it's a convenient description. This is HAR 10419 at 8. Now, we don't. Perhaps it's easier not to turn that up because I might lose what's on the screen, which we've taken some time to put up there. But let me just summarise it for you. He says it was decided to remove the return on the cladding facing the window and include an aluminium angle instead. So can you see that? Can you see that in the
one on the left has an angle and a fixing through? Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the one on the left, exactly. The one on the left has a return on the cladding facing. Mm-hmm. You see that? The return on the cladding which faces the window. You see that? But on the right, that's been changed, and there's a little L-shaped aluminium bracket.
Yes.
Between the cladding and the window. Do you see that?
Yes.
So, he also says that the window vent profile was changed. He also says that he added in the detail of the adhesive foam, and you can see again on the picture that in the left hand of the stamped version, there's no reference to adhesive foam, just the EPDM. Do you see that?
Yes.
Bonded. You see that there, the little dotted black line.
Yep.
Whereas on the right-hand side, you've got a larger shaded area with an arrow showing adhesive foam. You see that?
Yes.
Right. And then he also says that he removed the local fixing straps to reflect things as they had been built. And you can see that, I think, from
That was what I mentioned earlier. I
Yes.
think. Yeah.
Exactly.
At least that's how.
Yes. Now, you just comparing those drawings, the words PPC angle to match panel has been added to the unstamped version, and it's not in the stamped version. You see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And we can also see local fixing straps are shown on the stamped drawing, which showing that they were to be installed behind the window frame, and they've been omitted from the unstamped one. I think we've seen that, haven't we?
Yes.
Yes, and we've seen the layer of foam. Now, looking at those differences, Mr. Lamb says in his statement that he had had a discussion about these drawings in about February 2015. So that's about a month after you had stamped the stamped version as status A. Now, first of all, do you recall any discussion about those drawings in around February 2015?
I don't recall,
Okay.
but it doesn't mean they didn't take place. I mean,
No, I'm not suggesting that it didn't, Mr. Crawford. I'm just
Yes,
asking
yeah,
for your
sorry.
recollection. Now, is it right that the unstamped drawing was not sent to Studio E, so far as you know?
if you're telling me that, yes.
Well, I'm just asking you. Have you ever, before this inquiry began, had you ever seen the unstamped version of this drawing with the changes I've shown?
The only reason I'm caveating that, sorry, it's not to be difficult, but we literally have files with hundreds, maybe thousands of drawings that I wouldn't be able to categorically say
Right.
without checking.
Okay, all right. Now, Mr. Lamb says that in relation to the drawings that we've been looking at, that the fundamentals of the design drawing were reflected by revision D, issued on the 13th of January 2015, which is the stamped, which is both of those actually, and that there were ongoing discussions with Studio E about the cladding gap between the column cladding and the spandrel cladding. And my question is, in light of what he proposes to say to the inquiry, were there ongoing discussions at this point, January or February 2015, about the cladding gap?
Sorry, this is the cladding gap between the column enclosure and the
At the edge
spandrel?
of the window, yes. Between the column cladding and the spandrel cladding,
Yeah.
to be more accurate. You're right.
But the gap looks the same between the two drawings.
Yes, indeed. And the question is, were there ongoing discussions in January, February 2015 about how to deal with that gap?
There may well have been, I don't recall.
Right. Do you remember whether there was a proposal about how that cladding gap would be dealt with?
I don't recall. I mean, there's rolling conversations about multiple aspects in these meetings.
Right.
I don't recall specifics.
Do you ever recall a discussion with Mr. Lamb or anybody else at Harley about the use of adhesive foam?
I don't know.
You don't? Do you ever remember a discussion with him about the removal of the straps?
I can't specifically recall. I mean, as I said before, he may have tabled it, he may not have.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, we are absolutely mid-flow on this, but I anticipate a short
Well, I
further
think if we
break
don't
is
take a
needed.
break now,
Well, I think we'll never have one, so
you'll never
exactly.
get one. And I think you'd like a break, wouldn't you, Mr. Crawford?
Yes, please.
Yeah, we'll have a 10-minute break, come back at 12:20. Right, would you like to go to the usher, please? Twenty past 12, please. Thank you.
Sorry, Kate. I know it is.
Right, would you ask Mr. Crawford to come back, please? Right, Mr. Crawford?
Yes.
Good, thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Millett?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Crawford, just before the break, I was asking you about a discussion with Mr. Lamb about adhesive foam. The next question is, when did you learn about the change in design so that adhesive foam would now be installed in the position as shown on the unstamped drawing?
I didn't know adhesive foam was used.
You didn't know? You never knew? Is that right?
I don't think so, no.
Does it come as a surprise to you that Harley was adding new products to these drawings and then them not going through you?
Well, it only corroborates what I said earlier, which is we comment on architectural intent, not in specific technical details.
You'll recall I said to you that Mr. Lamb says that the unstamped drawing was changed to reflect things as they had been built. Did you know at the time that Harley was changing the drawings to reflect things as they had been built?
I can't say I was. No.
Okay, I'm now going to ask you some questions about the design of the windows. Now, the new windows in the cladding system were outside and forward of the concrete slabs at the window head and the concrete columns that formed the jambs and the concrete spandrel panels which supported the sills, weren't they?
Yes.
Yes. Do you agree that in order safely to be able to place the windows outside the plane of the external wall, you needed to protect any cavity from the risk of an internal fire migrating around the window edges and into any cavity lying within the external wall space?
The gap between the windows
Yeah.
and the internal wall, I think originally we showed the birch face ply with the insulation and plasterboard sealed up to.
Yeah. My question is perhaps a long one, but it was supposed to be a simple one. No, I'll ask it again. Do you agree that in order to be able to place the windows safely outside the plane of the external wall, you needed to protect any cavity from the risk of an internal fire migrating round the window edges and into any cavity lying within the external wall?
There's slightly conflicting opinions in this. Traditionally, in a building, you have an opening and you have a window, and you place the window in the opening. The opening usually has a tolerance. Traditionally, that seal around there is usually never fire rated.
Yeah.
As the window itself is not fire rated, so effective opening is an unfire rated opening. Within our spec, we specified that the lining should come up to and fire seal to the round opening, which would have dealt with that scenario anyway.
Right, I'm not quite sure that's an answer to my question, but let's see how we go with the next one. Would you agree with me that in order to comply with the building regulations, it was necessary to ensure a number of things, and I'll put two to you. First, that all components and materials within the cavity, within the external wall construction, complied with paragraph 12.7 of approved document B, which governs insulation.
Limited combustibility.
Yes.
If you're following ADB, yes.
Yes. And that would include, wouldn't it, insulation contained within the voids behind the heads, jambs and sills of the windows? Yes?
If you're following ADB, yes.
If you're following ADB, and if you're not following ADB, what would you do?
You'd have had to have found other means to justify that compliance.
So you'd need to be able to identify the risk and then fire engineer around it?
Yes.
I think that's what you're saying. Yeah. Now, it's right, isn't it, that the changes in the size and the placing of the windows created gaps as a result of moving the windows out of the plane of the concrete structure?
there's a gap around the windows.
Yes.
I mean, do you want to show me in a drawing specifically what you mean?
Well, as a result, well, I mean, I'm asking you. You were there.
Yeah, but you
I mean,
asked
is it
me,
right?
You asked me theoretical questions in words. It's easier for me to, if you show me in a drawing what you mean, because I'm frightened I'm not
Well,
necessarily.
I can certainly do that.
Standard.
Let's look at SEA 00003040, which is the stamped version, which I think fortuitously we've still got. Well, I've still got on my screen. You don't have it on yours. So, thank you. No, that's not it. Page 7 is what we want. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Window jambs, upper levels. So just looking at that, that's the stamped version that we were looking at earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And can you see that there's a gap between the sides of the windows and their adjacent columns on this drawing of between 35 and 90 millimetres?
Yes, that's right.
Those are the gaps I'm talking about.
The original scheme involved keeping the original window frames. And so this is what it's showing us. The gap is being determined by the existing window frame, which is that dotted frame you can see in there.
Yes. So and perhaps it may be easier to do this by reference to a version of the drawing in Dr. Lane's report, if I can just do that. Can you please go to INQ 00011312 at page 7? That's INQ 00011312, page 7. So this is the same drawing. Dr. Lane has added some colours to it.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, you can see that the shape of the existing concrete facade leaves channels which appear to be unfilled with insulation.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that?
Yes.
So those are the yellow runnels that sit behind the insulation. So those are some gaps there. Was that a matter that concerned you at the time, or that you thought might need correction?
They're very, very small gaps to my mind, but it didn't concern me at the time, no.
Right. I misspoke when I said Dr. Lane. In fact, I meant Mr. Paul Hyatt. I don't think anything turns on that. Now, although you address changes to the design of the windows in your statement in a number of places, I don't think you ever actually specifically address the issue of the size of the gaps between the edges of the window frames and the edge of the concrete window surround. All these runnels that we've seen coloured here. Is there a reason for that?
Which one, sorry?
Well, take the green shaded area, the gaps there,
Yes.
which we were talking about a little bit earlier. You don't specifically address the question of the size of those gaps, which existed between the edge of the window and the edge of the concrete itself, the surround. You don't address that in your statement, do you? And I just wanted to know why that was.
I'm not even sure what the point is. I mean, the insulation comes up and it closes that gap.
Yes, and my question is really about the choice of materials, which I'm going to come to about that. But do you recall having any input into the choice of materials used to fill that gap?
Beyond what was in our specification, I think K11555 talks about rock-wool fill gaps, and then there's reference in P20 to the birch face ply, and there's reference to fire sealing of the internal walls to
Right.
the edge. I mean,
Let's turn then to a slightly different topic, but only slightly. Insulation materials behind the internal window lining. It's really the same topic in a different way. If we could please look at HAR 000-10440 in the offline version. This is the unstamped drawing we were looking at before. It's the offline version, HAR 000-1. Thank you. And if we can just have that expanded just a little bit. you can see again, we've looked at this before, the adhesive foam, the aluminium angle, and other changes. At the top of the drawing to the right of the column, do you see it says there's a markup, window board and soft joint by others. It's vertical writing, I'm afraid, but do you see that there? Second item
Yes.
down. Right. And that rather suggests or indicates that the new internal window reveals that would be installed as part of the internal window reveal. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. And above that, we can see existing frame remaining in most cases, removed by others where necessary. You see that?
Yes.
And we can see the outline in there, in the dotted line, of the original metal window frame, which was to remain in situ, in place in most cases. Am I right about that?
That's what you just mentioned, yes.
Yeah, that's it, just to get it right on the drawing. And below the outline of the original metal, the original metal window frame, we can see the insulation indicated and the markup, insulation by others. You see that?
Yes.
And there is a drawing pattern which indicates the insulation. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. But by the way, I should just ask you this question. Does that pattern, to you, indicate an insulation of mineral wool?
I think traditional drawing convention, and I'd say especially before people were using computers, then you'd probably see, yeah, that was definitely mineral wool. I think what's happened, particularly the last 20 or so years, is that the conventions on representing insulation have been relaxed somewhat, and that's certainly my experiences. I've seen the folded pattern and the hatch pattern used interchangeably to represent different types of insulation. That may have come about just because there are more foam type insulations around, but also when you start using BIM, Revit and programs like that, people have also started to use other forms of representation for insulation as well, such as yellow blocking and stuff like that. So
Right.
in the era of drawing boards, I'd have said you'd have been more inclined to read that as categorically a mineral wool type insulation, but I think those boundaries have been very much blurred, particularly latterly.
Now, in this drawing, as you can see, at the very top, above the label to existing frame,
Yeah.
it's quite difficult to see this, but can you see that there's a 40 in the gap,
Yes.
which shows that the cavity there was 40 millimetres wide at the jam condition?
Yes.
Right, so if we now go to SEA 0000169, page 243, please. This should be, if I'm right, at the NBS spec. P10, sundry insulation proofing work. Yes. You see that?
Yes.
And at paragraph 235, near the bottom of the page, compressible insulation in gaps. You see that? Yes?
Yes.
And manufacturer Rockwool,
Yes.
pen code, Bridgend. And you can see that there is a material, second bullet point down, and we've looked at this before, material, mineral wool to BS EN 13162. You see that?
Yes.
Now, if we look back, please, at the drawing. In fact, let's go to a different drawing. If we go to the offline version of SEA 00002499, just want to show you a Studio E employs requirement drawing. I think it's one we've already seen before, actually, but yes. We can see, and this is a Studio E employs requirement drawing from September 2013, proposed typical bay plan section and elevation. Now we can see there's no indication of any packing material to the internal window lining there, is there? If you look at the proposed section typical bay on the right.
I think you might have to blow it up a bit.
Right, if you blow that up, please. Perhaps a bit more, yes, and then focus in on that. If you look down that, you can see that there's no...
It's solid wood board in there, though,
Yes.
from what I can see.
And Studio E had specified the compressible rock wool insulation in the NBS, as we've just seen, but neither mineral wool nor rock wool is specified on this drawing, is it?
On this specific drawing? No.
That's right. Now, moving away from that a little, do you accept that Studio E ought to have produced 1 in 5 detailed drawings which showed in adequate detail how the voids that we've looked at around the window linings at head, jambs and sills should have been packed with insulation?
No.
Why don't you accept that?
The detail design of the cladding would precipitate the resolution of that detail, and then from that detail and following that detail process, you'd be able to address that at a 1 to 5 scale.
See, the work is indicated in the NBS specification as to what's got to go in there.
No, that's a general clause, but you'd apply it to that kind of area. Same with, for example, is it K10 on linings? It mentions about fire sealing of the linings up to the openings.
Did you ever have a discussion with Harley about the choice of insulating materials to be used in the gaps that we've been looking at?
In those gaps, no.
No. So are you really saying that you just left it to Harley to get on with?
The detailed design of that cladding package was for Harley, where if Harley have, as I noted, they've said works to be completed by others, then this is an issue for Ryden in their package split.
Who did you think the others would be?
That's an issue for Ryden and its package split and its subcontractors. That's what they do. They manage the packages and they manage the interfaces. If they'd, for example, if they'd wanted a detail to resolve that interface, or the problems that had come out of the, let's say, renegotiated position of Harley in terms of where that interface started and stopped, then I'd expect Ryden to issue an RFI to me asking for clarification, at which point we would have produced that detail if they'd requested it.
Can you go back to SEA 3040. This is something we've looked at before. Go to page 7. This is the drawing we looked at twice, I think, now. This is the one which you stamped on the 16th of January 2015. This is the stamped version.
Yes.
Do you remember we looked at the stamped and the unstamped? This is the stamped version. I just want to ask you about that. You can see that it's approved for construction and stamped by you.
No, it's stamped by me. It's not approved for construction.
No, it's stamped approved for construction and then stamped by you.
Yes.
Yes. So, and I'm trying to see it on this version. Yes, there it is at the top right-hand corner. We looked at it before. Existing frame remains
in place
in most cases, removed by others where necessary, and then again insulation by others. Just looking at that, were you quite content to mark this status A, even though this was going to be insulation to be left for other people?
As I've stated before, our comments are based on architectural intent. The package split in terms of package responsibilities, the interfaces between packages is a matter for the main contractor.
But having seen the NBS specification, which very clearly spelt out the use of rock wool in these gaps, why did you stamp this status A when the drawing didn't refer to the use of rock wool in that space where it says insulation by others?
But sorry, that doesn't follow. For example, let's say Harley have agreed that this isn't within their package of works, which they would have had to have done with Ryden. Then Ryden would then decide whose package of works it fell into. In deciding whose package of works it falls into, Ryden then are responsible for issuing the design information that subcontractor would require to complete their works. That would include the spec.
I don't understand that, I'm afraid, Mr. Crawford. What I'm trying to understand is why you were able to stamp this drawing as conforming to design intent in circumstances where the drawing did not refer to the specific insulation that Studio E itself had specified should go into the gap where it says insulation by others.
But that's because what Harley have drawn is indicative package works from someone else. What I'm saying to you is if Harley have agreed their package of works, which is what they've identified on their drawing, what they were not completing would be to be completed by someone else. In order to get to that position, they'd had to agree it with Ryden. Ryden, as the main contractor, would have had to decide who was completing that portion of works. In order for them to agree who's carrying out that portion of works, they would have to give them a brief, a set of drawings, a set of spec in order to do that. So that information would be contained within that package of works. They wouldn't be giving the Harley's drawings to another subcontractor.
Why didn't you comment on this drawing and ask or insist let me just ask the question, please, Mr. Crawford, if I can. When you stamped this status A, why didn't you insist that instead of insulation by others, it said mineral wool? Because that was what was in the MBS spec.
I'm sorry, that just doesn't follow. I mean, I could sit and insist on any comment on anything. I mean, what they've noted is, here's the portion of work that isn't ours, so why should I comment on it? I don't know. I don't know what they intended to put in there. I don't know what Ryden intended to put in there. It's a design and build contract. They could administer it as they saw fit, assuming they agreed it with the client, KCTMO. Do you understand? I wouldn't comment on the concrete column. Why would I comment on the concrete column? It's nothing to do with Harley's work. I'm commenting on Harley's work.
Well, Mr. Crawford, what I'm suggesting to you is that by leaving the words insulation by others in the drawing, it might be thought that you were approving the suggestion that some other kind of insulation, other than that specified in the NBS specification, could be used.
But why would I be suggesting that by not commenting on it?
Well, I've asked the question, and I've noted you responded to it with a question. I shall move on.
Again, sorry, just to be clear, I'm not trying to be difficult. This is just my understanding of how you mark up subcontractors' drawings.
Now, can we then...
Sorry, can I just see if I can help here? I mean, I think what Mr. Millett is really asking is why, when the specification that Studio E had formulated prescribed mineral wool, did you not comment on the fact that the drawing, which eventually emanated from Harley, did not seem to provide for mineral wool? It provided for any insulation to be supplied by a third party.
But it doesn't say that, it just shows an insulation.
Exactly, not necessarily mineral wool.
Yes.
And that's the question. Why was this not a matter of comment when it allowed for a departure from the specification?
But, for example, if you look at the insulation at the front, in the diagonal. I don't think it says exactly what that insulation is.
Well, maybe, but
Do you get my point? I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, I haven't. The hatched area inside the window is some form of neoprene insulation. That's not labelled either.
all right. So you what you're saying is you didn't consider it was something that required comment,
Yeah.
simply because it didn't reflect with exactness what was in the specification.
But you can't tell whether it exactly reflects whether it's in the spec or not from that.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, if it said styrene foam, something like this, then okay, you could say that's not what's in the spec.
Mm.
But even then, it's labelled by others, as opposed to what I'm being asked to comment on, which is Harley's contribution.
All right. Well, I'm not sure I helped you at all, Mr. Millett, but
There it is.
thank you, Mr. Crawford.
Okay.
Mr. Crawford, thank you for that. Can we please turn to SEA 000124940? Yes. This is an email from Jason North. He's Ryden. To you, dated the 12th of March 2015. Copy to Simon O'Connor, also of Ryden. And the subject is Windows Grenfell Tower. Jason North was the site manager at the time. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yeah. Afternoon, Neil. We are installing Windows at the moment, and I can't seem to find anywhere a detail for insulation behind the fixed panel alongside the windows. Can you point me in the right direction with this? Now, from that email, did you know at least by then that the packing material to be used behind the internal linings to the windows had not been specified?
I don't think that's exactly what that question is asking.
Well, what did you understand by his question?
I think he means the I think he means the fixed panel within the windows where the concrete, well, there's precast concrete and there's I can't remember what it was, it's some sort of thermocrete block or something came up. I think he's looking for the insulation detail around the back of that, if I'm reading that correctly.
Right. Did you go back and look at the relevant drawings to try to answer his question in the way you just said you understood it?
I don't recall, but possibly, yes.
Do you think you went back to check the MBS specification?
I don't recall.
Did you make any inquiry of Harley or Ryden regarding the type and product name of the insulation he was talking about, as you understood it?
I don't think that was within Harley's works. If it's the bit we were talking about, I think they're talking about.
Did this not prompt you to go to Ryden or ask somebody else at Ryden, but perhaps Simon O'Connor, the question why you were being asked this question and not Harley?
No, because I don't. If it's the bit I think he's referring to, it's part of the internal dry lining package. So it's behind that sort of central column element, and it sits behind the middle of the windows. So
I see. So you think he was talking about the insulation behind the infill panels? We call them infill panels, which we're going to come to later.
yeah, there's infill panel with there's a. I think it was a thermocrete concrete element, and I think what he's talking about is the insulation round and behind that, I think.
Okay, let's look at your statement, because I think we get a bit of help from that. SEA 000142275, page 41, please. And you deal with Mr. North's inquiry at paragraph 118. We can look at that. You refer to the email, and you say, I've not found a response. This is the last sentence. I've not found a response, but I believe I would have pointed him towards Studio E's 1 in 20 section drawings. You see that?
Yes.
In fact, it's likely that you didn't respond to this query at all, given that we've not been able to find any email response from you. So,
Well, you're saying that, but I did speak with Jason North quite a lot on site, so I'm not
Right.
sure if that's necessarily true.
well, do you have a recollection of dealing with his query on site?
I don't recall.
You don't. You say that you believe you would have pointed him towards Studio E's 1 in 20 section drawings, but we've already seen some of them, and they don't indicate any packing materials to the internal window lining. And-
there's more than just the drawing you showed me at 1 to 20. For example, the dry lining type drawings, I think there's a junction detail in that might have covered it.
Okay, let's look at something else on this aspect. Dixon. Did you remember that Mr. Dixon of SD were engaged by, I think, Ryden to undertake some of the internal lining and plastering works?
I don't know, Mr. Dixon.
Right. Do you remember having any discussions, either with Ryden or an entity called SD Plastering, or indeed anybody else, about the selection of materials for use within the cavity we've been looking at?
No.
Do you know why PIR and sometimes phenolic insulation was packed behind the window jambs and sills rather than the rock wool which was specified in the NBS specification?
I had no idea that had happened until after the fire, and saw pictures of the exposed areas.
Right. Does it surprise you, or did it surprise you when you discovered that fact?
Yes.
So can we take it that you and nobody else at Studio E were ever aware of the decision, whosever it was, to use PIR or phenolic as insulation in those areas? When you went on your site visits, did you not see the use of PIR or phenolic insulation in those areas?
When we had site visits, they were to the lower levels, to the management office for site meetings. Studio E didn't have any inspection appointment or monitoring appointment in that regard, so we weren't looking at it, we weren't showing them, we weren't looking at it.
Right. I'm going to turn to the next topic, which is the window-insulated infill panels and cavity insulation, which made up part of the fenestration or window arrangement at Grenfell Tower. Now, we can look at it again, but we've already established that in the NBS specification, an aluminium-faced insulated infill core panel had been specified. I can go back to the spec if you like, Mr. Crawford.
No, I do recall.
If you recall that.
The first thing.
And I think we've also established, and again we can go back to it if you like, that there's no reference in the spec to a product or type of insulation to be used as the insulated infill panel in the tender drawing.
There's a performance spec, yes.
Yes. Now, can we look, please, at HAR 00008886? Right, thank you. And this is a Harley drawing, Kevin Lamb's, 22nd of September 2014, typical bay levels 1 to 20 west/east elevation. You see that?
Yes.
And this is this is revision D, dated the 3rd of March 2015. Okay, and you can see how the build-up of the revisions went, and this latest one is fire breaks added. You see that?
Yes.
Right. Now let's look at the window arrangement. You can see that the window passing between the columns across the flat partitions is shaded and designated P1. It's not very clear on what we've got on the screen, but perhaps we can expand the bigger shaded squares. There are two of them. Perhaps we can expand the left-hand one for convenience so that everybody can see it. You can just see in the top left-hand corner a P1.
Yes.
Yes. Mr. Operator, I wonder if we could just blow that up a little bit more so that everybody in the room and in public can see that, to be absolutely clear, because its designation P1 is important. And while we're at it, will you also agree with me that the smaller shaded area, where the shading goes from bottom right to top left, is marked P2?
Yes.
Yes? Now, if we look, please, next at HAR, and we'll come back to that in due course, but HAR 00003866. That was 3886. Let's look at 3866. This is the Harley specification notes, some of which we looked at yesterday. I'm not sure we looked at this one yesterday. It's dated of origin 15th of January 2015. Kevin Lamb again. See that?
Yes.
And we can see that Mr. Lamb here specifies, if you ignore the red annotations, outer, this is on the left-hand side, under glazing G1 vision. Do you see? It says outer 2 millimetre aluminium. You see that? 2 millimetre aluminium skin. This is under glazing P1 panels, I should have said. Should have been clear, because there's quite a lot of glazing in there.
Yeah.
Glazing P1 panels, you see?
Yes.
2 millimetre aluminium core, and then underneath, 2 millimetres aluminium skin, and then underneath that core, 24 millimetres Kingspan TP10 rigid insulation, and then inner 2 millimetres aluminium skin. You see that?
Yes.
And that's for P1, and then for P2, which was the smaller little square we saw, outer 2 millimetre aluminium skin, core 24 millimetre Kingspan, inner 2 millimetres aluminium skin.
Yeah.
Yes?
Just to note, this is not my handwriting.
No, well, I was going to ask you, do you know whose handwriting it is?
No, but it's not mine.
Do you know or when those red annotations were applied?
I haven't seen this drawing in this form. So no, I don't know who or when that was done.
I see.
I actually assumed it was someone from your team.
My team?
Yeah, well, to me it looks like someone's measuring something against what was actually written.
Well, so the short answer is you don't know who
No, yes,
or
that's
added
correct.
it or when?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So can I take it from that you never saw this version of this document with those additions to it?
No.
Right. More generally, were you aware at the time that the insulation material had been amended under P1 from Kingspan TP10 to 25 millimetres of styrofoam?
I don't believe so, but again, I've been commenting on architectural intent as far as drawings were concerned. But if someone had changed something beyond this, then I wouldn't have been aware of it in any...
Right, well, let's pursue this a bit more. Can you go, please, to HAR 00003869? And we'll just do this drawing and then break, because there's a string of these to look at. This is the same document in printed form, stamped by you on the 26th of January.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I've just misled you. Let me take it a different way. Start with your stamp on the right-hand side, Studio E. You stamped this B on the 26th of January 2015, yes?
Yes.
Now, if you look at the left-hand side, you can see that under glazing P1 panels, we now have core 25 millimetres styrofoam.
Yes, so
for P1.
They've changed the P1, but not the P2.
Exactly. Now, when you saw this specification note Did you notice that change?
You mean when I was commenting on this drawing?
Yes.
Well, I couldn't say, but I would have been commenting as if maintained up to now on architectural intent, so I wouldn't necessarily have been looking for that sort of change.
Do you know why the amendment was made to styrofoam in P1 but not in P2?
I've absolutely no idea.
Did you or Kevin Lamb, to your knowledge, ever inform the author of the red annotations? And I suppose if you didn't know who it was, you wouldn't have done. But did you know whether anybody ever told whoever it might be who'd written that there and had made the change that the prescription of styrofoam was not being followed for P2 and raised that question?
I'm getting a little confused, sorry.
Yes, I'm not surprised it was a confusing question. Did you, or to your knowledge, Kevin Lamb, ever raise the question with anybody as to why TP10 had been removed for P1 and replaced with styrofoam?
I have no recollection of...
Did you ever discuss the use of styrofoam within the external wall build-up with anybody at Studio E?
Not that I recall, no.
Did you ever raise the issue with Harley?
Not that I recall.
Did you ever raise it with Ryden?
Not that I recall.
Do you know or agree that styrofoam is a trading name for extruded polystyrene insulation, otherwise known as XPS?
I'm aware of XPS, and it's used. XPS is used in inverted roof structures, for example, and with fire retardant in it. All right.
We're going to look at P2 after the break. Mr. Chairman, I think now is a reasonably convenient time for a break.
Good moment, yes, all right. Well, Mr. Crawford, we'll have a break now for some lunch.
Okay.
Please don't talk to anyone about your evidence over the lunch period. We'll resume at 2:05, please.
Okay.
All right. Let's
Thanks.
go to the usher, please. Thank you. Good. 2:05, please. Thank you.